Hello and welcome. I am Kalila Jones, and I am the Marketing and Public Relations Coordinator for Moms in Motion and At Home Your Way. Today, friends, I have a special guest with us, Dr. Jeffrey Katz, and he is going to be discussing ADHD, which is a topic that I know many of you have reached out to me to let me know that you're interested in. So you are in for a treat. You get the information you've been seeking. Dr. Jeffrey Katz, how are you?
I'm doing well this morning.
Very well. Good. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm in Virginia Beach. I see primarily children, adolescents, and families, but because I specialize in ADHD and learning disabilities, if you have a child who's ADHD, often you have a 50% chance either you or your husband or whoever is ADHD somewhere in the family. So it's heritable. So what happened years ago, I'm seeing a lot of kids, and then parents started to say, well, I think I had these same kinds of problems when I was a child. And I also still have some of these problems, could I be ADHD? So now I do a lot of evaluations of adults also.
Oh, wow.
And I'm very involved in the ADHD community. I've been interested in ADHD since I was in graduate school to get my PhD. And there's a national organization, CHADD, CHADD.org, which is the largest organization in the United States that is primarily interested in ADHD and associated conditions. I'm on the National Board of Directors. I'm the co-chair of the Public Policy Committee, the National Public Policy Committee. I'm also on the Professional Advisory Board. And it's not necessarily that I'm so brilliant about things. I'm on the Professional Advisory Board, and they're more brilliant than me, but I learn a lot from knowing the people who are doing the research, knowing the people who are the top people in the field. So I get a lot out of it for myself. So I do specialize in ADHD.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if I believe that you're not brilliant about it, but
Nice.
so I want to ask you, what is involved in finding out if your child has ADHD? What's involved? How do you figure that out?
Well, you could really go to any mental health practitioner. You can go to your pediatrician, for example, and they are licensed to make a diagnosis. But saying yes or no doesn't really give you the information that you really want. People in the field, they want to see that you have a comprehensive evaluation. And it's comprehensive meaning you're not just looking at ADHD. Obviously people don't call me just for fun. I mean, they call me because they're concerned about things, right? So maybe the concerns are ADHD, maybe there's something else going on, but maybe they combine together. So a comprehensive evaluation is really determine what might the problem be. If it's ADHD, that gives us certain ideas of things to do. If it's anxiety, if it's learning problems. Unfortunately for people with ADHD, a high rate of people with ADHD also have anxiety, depression, learning problems. So you really want to kind of cover all your bases. And it's not just, a good evaluation, honestly, you get some history, you get a developmental history. A lot of parents would identify their children as having associated kind of behaviors from the age 2 up. Like the terrible 2s became the terrible 3s or 4s.
Right.
Or they noticed that their child was just spacey and just, okay, but just daydreaming,
Right.
lethargic or slow moving. So getting a lot of that history is very important. I usually get school records. I like to look, not necessarily the grades, honestly, it's really the teacher comments.
Yeah. And the
So I get all that,
yeah.
right? And then I have different sets of behavior rating scales. So if you go to the pediatrician, they use the Vanderbilt Scale, which is, it's well-known and useful form, but it gives you certain information. So I give rating forms that look at everything from depression, anxiety, social problems, to ADHD issues, to oppositional behavior, conduct problems. So I want to really see how the child falls out. I give an ADHD rating scale, which is the criteria for diagnosing ADHD. And the other thing in big ADHD these days is executive function issues. So it's not just, is a child inattentive, or hyperactive impulsive or combined. It's how does it affect their executive function? How does it affect their working memory? How does it affect how they transition between tasks? How does it affect how organized they are? How does it affect their getting started on tasks? How does it affect their emotional control? So a lot of kids with ADHD, they're emotionally dysregulated. So you kind of really want that kind of information.
Well, can I, can I go back? I'm very familiar with executive functioning because my son has ADHD and my husband does too. But for those who are not aware of what that is, can you explain what that is?
So executive functioning, and there's no set, these are the executive functions because it comes from neuropsychology and there are all sorts out there. Okay. But with ADHD, the primary ones, it's really how your brain, it's like you could have all the different parts of your brain that work fine, right? But if you don't, like an orchestra, all the parts are good. But if you don't have a good conductor who kind of keeps things going the way they're supposed to, and who comes in when and how loud, then that's executive function.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's how those things work together.
Okay.
And actually, that's why I don't need to do psychological testing to come up with the diagnosis. I don't do, and the people who are honestly the researchers and the major people in the field, they don't do computerized tests to decide. Okay, and a lot of people do that because those are like lab tests. And I can have a kid sit here and do well on a, push the button every time you see a 9, and he's fine, gets a great score. Now, if you watch him, he's up, he's walking around the room, he comes by the desk, he pushes a thing, he goes over there, pushes the thing. He looks fine on a test.
Right.
On paper. Yeah. But you put him in school, and you have to think about what's happening there. Right. So that's kind of the function aspect of it. Okay. Is, you can have all these symptoms of ADHD, but if you're on some South Sea island, nobody really cares how many coconuts you pick up.
Right.
So,
right.
You have to have symptoms and some kind of impairment. So the executive function are those things that a teacher might say, well, he's unorganized, or he can't get his thoughts on paper, or he's very, very slow when he's working. Right. He doesn't remember the routine, or he reacts really quickly. He gets upset, or he maybe doesn't bully other kids, but they get tired of him always wanting it his way, kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. So there's some basic, criteria for ADHD, but it can be different for different people. So I can just say some basic things about it. So I get all these forms from parents, grandparents, friends of the family. I get them from teachers. I get it from the regular teacher in the classroom. I get it from music, art, PE, because the kid may have trouble in the classroom, but in PE, he gets to run. Right. Or he has trouble in PE because nobody's telling him to stay here, do that. It's not structured enough. Right. So maybe in the classroom, he's fine, but on PE. Right. But I want to see music, art, so what situations is it more problematic? Right.
That makes a lot of sense. I just got a text message from my son's PE teacher that he's struggling in PE, and for him, it's the not wanting to lose and not wanting to win because he doesn't want someone else to be upset because they lost. Oh, wow. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. They didn't ask us how he does in specials with music and whatnot, but he did present different behaviors and things in those. So I'm glad that you said that.
And that's, if there's one thing that's consistent about ADHD is that it's inconsistent.
Right.
and part of that is, ADHD is not about a kid's ability. Mm-hmm. It's about can they perform the ability at the time it's needed. Right. So, it's not like a kid with ADHD necessarily can't read, but, you give them something they're interested in, they read, because it's not that they can't pay attention. Right. They can regulate when to apply it. Right. And if it's not something that's interesting to them, yes, so it's not but if a kid has a good day at school on Wednesday and gets all their work done, and Thursday he doesn't, you don't want the school to be saying, oh, he's just making a choice not to because he really did good on Wednesday. And that's not it.
Right.
ADHD is inconsistent.
I think that's what is so confusing for people and why there's so much stigma with surrounding ADHD, because if I know if my son hyper focuses on something, you know, yeah, everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like my son could draw the world map just from hand, by hand. But if you ask him to focus on something he doesn't care about, they're just like, well, he's just being lazy, or, and that's really not fair.
And part of that is, and why it's confusing to people, is that ADHD is not crazy behavior.
Right.
Developmental disorder, meaning that as people develop, they gain different abilities, so it's everybody's inattentive at times, right? Everybody
Right.
can be impulsive at times. And what all these forms are looking at actually is not, do they do this or not? It's compared to other kids their age,
Right.
how often are they doing it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's really, so it's not different behavior than other kids.
Right.
Right. Other kids are like that at times, but it is becomes so much or so little, and it's unregulated, that it's creating problems.
Right.
And that's why it's different. And I'm sure, if and I have it in the office, the kid is, the father thinks he's doing something, the father yells at him. Well, the kid is going to sit.
Right.
Also, kids with ADHD, when they first meet me and they're going to the doctor, oh, they act really nice in the office. And I always ask parents, so is this the usual way it is? Oh, no. Maybe the doctor's office, but he doesn't want a shot,
Yeah. That
So,
makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's just like we all use the restroom, but if someone is going every 5 minutes, there's a
you
problem.
have to wonder about,
Right?
is there a problem? Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's also very important for parents and teachers to understand that kids want to do well.
Mhm.
Kids want to be loved. They want to be liked. They want to do well. And if your kid is having trouble doing that, it's possible something's getting in the way.
Right.
Because kids on their own, that's just what they want.
Right. I mean, it's inherently, I think, people, we want to do well. So if you're not, then, there's something there, So what are the treatments for ADHD, and how will I know if the treatments are actually working?
Okay. So treatments for ADHD, it's management. Okay. So the picture is management. So, and I'll talk about some specifics in a second, but ADHD doesn't go away, right? Now, they used to think that as a kid got older, got into being a teenager, that ADHD went away, because more often than not, the activity level, if they have hyperactivity, goes down. But the inattention, some of that impulsivity, distractibility can continue. Also, I better say, I say ADHD sometimes, I say ADD sometimes. Really, the term is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder of the predominantly inattentive type, of the predominantly hyperactive impulsive type, or the combined type. So most of the time, kids, adults have the combined type. There are a lot of kids who have the inattentive type. So they're not hyperactive impulsive, but they're spacey, daydreamy, lethargic, and slow moving. And then occasionally you get a kid who's got great attention, really attention, not an issue, but he's hyperactive impulsive, and that's it. So I want to tell you that. So what are the treatments? There are three main treatments. And there was a study done a number of years ago called the MTA, the I'm going to forget it, the multi-trial, but it was a national study that looked at treatments for ADHD in a number of different places. And although this study came out a long time ago, they're still getting research done out of it, of all the data. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what they found, they looked at kids who had intensive behavioral treatments at home in school. They looked at kids who had alone, just behavioral treatments. They had kids just medication management. They had kids who were combined behavioral treatment and medication management, and they had the no treatment control. No treatment control means they said, well, we don't have any more room in the study, maybe some other time.
Oh, okay.
So what do they find out? What is most effective? What they, what do you think might be most effective? Well, what they found out was that medication alone is really kind of top of the heap.
Mhm.
What came in second was no treatment.
Oh,
Now, people ask, why no treatment? Well, because those people
learn
didn't
from
wait. They went to see their doctor and they got medication. But it wasn't titrated. So the ones in the study, every month before they had to see if they should change the medication, the psychiatrist called the teacher and said, how's he doing in school? So the ones who got the best treatment, it was very closely controlled
Okay.
in the community. And then there was the behavior and medication combined, but it was really because of the medication. And then behavior alone. Not behavior alone was helpful, but what we know is that what the behavior treatments do is really help with social issues. It really helps with family type issues. It helps with some of the problems that ADHD can result in. But if you only could do one, it would be medication. But the true thing is you have to do everything. Medication alone doesn't teach skills.
Right.
Medication alone overall can help improve attention, focus, persistence of effort. And I see a lot of kids, the parents come to me because the kids are being oppositional. They don't do what they're supposed to do, the morning routine, the evening routine. They tell them anything and it takes forever. And it's interesting because if I diagnose a kid with ADHD and they get on medication, that's not happening.
Right.
Not like it was before.
Mhm.
So they weren't being oppositional. The kids wanted to do well because the medication doesn't make the kid do anything.
Right.
The medication helps the kid to do what they want to do.
Right.
Right? I want to read. I want to do this. If they want to be oppositional, the medication would help. But that's not what it's not what you usually see. You see that they work. Problem is medication isn't 24 hours a day.
Very true.
So that's medication. Therapy to some degree. Okay, just having ADHD, therapy helps to educate the parents, help them with behavior management, helps communication in the family, because there are things to work on there. Helps the kid to understand themselves, that there's nothing, quote, bad about them.
Yeah.
They have trouble paying attention sometimes.
Right.
And that's fine. The things that may help, or as what you really want them to do is to learn to advocate for themselves, to be able to say to the teacher, I spaced out, can you repeat that? Or I need this accommodation.
Right.
So therapy can be helpful. The medication. The other thing is school related stuff. So kids who have just ADHD would be eligible for what's called a Section 504 plan in school.
Right.
So when you say your son was having trouble in PE, my question is, does he have a 504 plan?
Yes,
you get a 504 plan, and they need to address then what happens in PE.
Right.
So that may be something that needs to get added into his 504 plan.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I text her back. We need to add some accommodations to his 504 plan.
CHAD is having its international conference coming up the beginning of November, actually. So if you're interested, it's virtual.
Yes, absolutely.
It's inexpensive for you.
Yeah.
So at chad.org, you'll see the international conference. And I'm speaking on Section 504.
Oh, okay.
I am, if I'm not brilliant about ADHD, I'm an expert on Section 504.
Oh, okay. You're earning your pay.
With the Office of Civil Rights, we talked them in a few years ago. We talked to them about the problem with Section 504, that schools were not doing well with it, and we ended up, my co-chair and I met regularly with the Office of Civil Rights in DC, the Department of Education, and they wanted guidance from. They wanted to know from us what the issues are.
Okay.
Or they wanted expert, and I can get a hold of the experts. So if they want an expert opinion about something. So a few years ago, they published the resource guide for ADHD in the schools, and it went out to every school district in the country. So Ingrid, my co-chair, and I are very proud because we had an integral part of helping OCR shape that. So that's something if people want later, they can send me
Absolutely.
something.
So
I
that's
can send
open
it.
to the public.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
And
definitely.
listen, I give it to every parent. And when I go to a school for a meeting, if they don't seem to understand what they're supposed to do, I send them a copy of it.
Oh my
So
gosh. I would
very
love to have a
helpful.
copy of that.
Because, for example, you could have a kid who's straight A's at school, but if they're having trouble getting their homework done, you can get a 504 to cover that, because you
Yeah.
should not be struggling with your kid.
Right.
So to me, helping kids at school is primary, because a lot of times kids are great over the summer. We can handle it over the summer.
Right.
But once they're in school, what breaks loose. And I think handling them in school and helping parents to understand that whatever they say to their kid before they go off to school, it ain't going to help in school, because kids with ADHD are in the moment.
In one ear, out the other.
Right? They have problems with understanding of time. They don't use experiences from the past, and they're not thinking about the future. Right. This is what happened right now.
Right.
So they're not going to get it. That's why in school has to handle things correctly.
Definitely. I love that you said that. So are there side effects to ADHD medication?
Okay. So first I have to give the disclaimer. I'm not a physician. I'm a psychologist, although I'm a doctor, and I tell kids that I'm a real doctor. But so I'm not a physician. So that's not my specialty.
Okay.
But in general, the medication is not problematic. The main side effects you see, especially initially, sometimes last some, is suppression of appetite. So kids don't eat as much. So they're not hungry necessarily when they're taking the medication. And what they say about that, I mean, the studies show that when you begin medication, the first couple of years is a slowing in weight gain and growth. But by the time the kid's a teenager, they're likely to be slightly taller than maybe they would have been, but otherwise they're fine. In fact, if your child's not eating much, if they do blood work, the kid's healthy.
Right.
They're just not eating much.
Right.
So then you have to weigh, how much of that's a problem. Some kids complain, I'm not hungry, I don't like that.
Right.
One thing I tell people is if he's not hungry at dinner, save dinner, and at 9 o'clock when he's hungry, let him eat. Okay, that's fine. It's not, I don't want to, it's he may not be hungry.
Yeah. And if you get a chance, you can also, I give my son a huge breakfast.
Absolutely.
And then his medication. He brings most of his lunch home, but then he has a big dinner. So yeah.
So so at breakfast you would give him anything, peanut butter. We used to give our kids 2% milk. And not that the kid, well, my younger one's ADHD, but pediatrician said, "Why are you doing that? Well, it's healthy." He said, "No, kids need to drink whole milk." Ice cream, peanut butter, brownies for me.
Thicken them up.
So, but generally, it's not a problem.
Okay.
And in fact, if you have a child who's small for their age, and sometimes the kids feel bad about that.
Yeah.
So you go to the pediatrician and you go to the what's the endocrinologist, right? And they do an X-ray of the hand, and they can see whether the child still has room in the growth plates. So we actually did that with our older one, and the endocrinologist said, "No, she may be a late bloomer, but she's going to be tall."
Wow,
don't worry about it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's how they know. And the point being, just because your child may be small and you worry, they're taking the medication, if in fact they need what's the treatment for it? Hormone treatment to grow.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily stop that they take medication for ADHD.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that it's not, the separate things.
Okay.
But you want to look at it. And the one other side effect that comes up sometimes is the sleep issues. So the medication is a stimulant.
Right.
And like I said, unfortunately, it's not necessarily 24 hours a day. But initially, when the kid's taking medication, they're likely to have more difficulty getting to sleep at night. But that usually goes away. Except that there's a high rate of sleep problems with kids with ADHD, even
Right.
without medication.
Yeah.
One of the questions you ask is, are they a restless sleeper? You know, do they have a hard time transitioning to bedtime? Usually the answer is going to be yes.
Mm-hmm.
Medication is not necessarily going to make it worse, but
Right.
you know, it's something, you know, you have to take into account too. So
Right.
those are basically the side effects, and
Okay.
long-term things don't really show any issue.
Okay. So you mentioned therapy, and you also mentioned like comorbidities. So I have a hard time personally as a mother understanding, okay, what is ADHD and what is the anxiety? Like, what is this particular behavior or whatever that's happening? Which is it? And then the therapy piece, does that really help the ADHD or does it help the comorbidities? Like,
I think that's your stuff. No, because I think you just pointed it out. You know, the therapy is not going to necessarily change ADHD. You know, kids go off to college and they fall apart, and then I see them because I'm going to do this on my own. I don't need this or that. I can do it. And very bright kids have terrible. My summer's filled with doing evaluations and writing letters to get kids back into school. Mm-hmm. So the therapy for ADHD is the more they understand it, the better. Right. Now, I'm going to say real quickly, there's for adults, another thing that's helpful is coaching. And this is something that's coming up, ADHD coaching. There's now studies that show it's useful, which is the coach meets with the person on 3 or 4 times online usually. What are you going to get done today? Let's set up a system for you that works. And then how are you going to be accountable? How are you going to be accountable to yourself? How are you going to motivate yourself to do something that you know you need to do, but you don't feel like doing, right?
Right.
So coaching's out there, but it's not therapy. So therapy really works on the comorbid conditions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes kids have anxiety and ADHD or depression, anxiety. Sometimes, and part of it's looking at family history, right? Was there a history of depression or anxiety? Right. Sometimes that anxiety is because of the ADHD, you know, because I'm not getting my work done and people getting mad at me and other kids don't seem to like me. So the therapy is very helpful. As one parent said, you know, I appreciate you really helping the mental health of my child. I don't know if it's helping the ADD. Okay. But to feel good about yourself, because studies show that ADHD does not have as much effect on what you're going to be like as an adult as do how you feel about yourself, your self-esteem. Are you resilient? Do you have a supportive family? Do you have a supportive community when you're involved in church or synagogue? Those things make more of a difference to how somebody is going to turn out as an adult than their ADHD.
I believe
now, they may have to struggle more with the ADHD. Maybe college takes a year longer, or getting into a job that, the brain doesn't fully develop to around the age of 26, by the way. Right. So, a lot of people start calling when, they know they have ADHD, but around the age of 26, they call because, well, this guy's settling down with a family. This guy has a solid job. This guy's this and that. And I'm still, I don't know what I'm doing.
Playing my video games,
Yes. So ADHD kids can do well. People can do well, but they need to understand themselves and understand that, if they get anxious or depression or other concerns or anger issues, they need to understand. And I think to understand, like with their anger issues, a lot of that is this emotional dysregulation.
Right.
So you have to learn skills. Now, maybe other people don't have to learn how to control their anger, but they're not ADHD. You need things you can do. I just tell somebody, don't be angry. No, you need to learn some skills about how do you cope with distress? How do you calm yourself down? How do you realize you're going to be impulsive? This is that kind of situation. You're going to get impulsive. Wait a second. You got to walk out for a second, settle yourself back down, and come back in. So those kinds of skills we want to teach.
So it sounds like it's in addition to like your natural supports, they need something to supplement that because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not enough, right? Well, that
It's
sounds
like,
good. Okay. So
okay.
are there any supplements or over the counter things or just natural things, holistic, that you think help ADHD
Um,
or that
it's
they
not
should
about,
avoid even?
well, that's a good question, too.
Yeah.
It's not about what I think, it's what the studies show.
Yes.
And the studies show that all the supplements out there, no. Now, when people talk about, to me, supplements or the Feinstein diet or this or that,
Right.
what I tell them is the thing to do is the gold standard treatment first. Gold standard treatment, medication, therapy, doing stuff with school. Once you know, for example, what the medication does, if you want to do a Feingold diet, or you want to try this supplement, go for it. Maybe it works for your kid.
Right.
But if you don't know what the gold standard does, then how are you supposed to know? And the advantage of the stimulants, which is what these medications are, is that they are short acting. They only work when you take it.
That's true.
You take it, if you take it every day for a year, but you don't take it on, year one, end of year one, day one, it's not going to work.
Right.
The advantage of that is you can do a trial. So what I tell parents is, give it to the kid for a month. You may have to titrate it up and increase the dosage, but see what it does over a month. If it's not helpful, you won't give it. If it's helpful, but you don't need it on the weekends, don't do it on the weekends, blah, blah, blah. But then you can do, and if you're really wondering whether it's helpful in school, for example, take a week after he's been doing well for a little while and just stop it for a week and then do it again for a week and stop it for a week. And you'll hear from the school. Well, I don't say that, but the idea is if it's helping, you'll end up hearing from the school that something's off, right?
Yeah.
But you can always do that. So doing a trial doesn't mean you have to be on medication for 6 months.
Right.
You can do a month and figure it out.
Right.
And parents are always in control. I mean, nobody can tell the parent what to do about medication.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So
there's no really supplement that's been shown. One thing they do look at is omega-3s, but the problem with omega-3s is that it has to be formulated in a way that gets through the blood-brain barrier thing. So there are some prescription omega-3s out there, actually. But even one of them, it's kind of, they're not as effective as the medication is.
Oh, okay.
They don't really do the job that the medication
Not enough. Okay. So let me ask you this, and I think this is a good question. It's definitely one I had. So how do you explain, or how do I explain my child's diagnosis to friends or family or even the school? Or, like I mentioned, some of the stigma associated with it. How do I explain it where they understand or try to understand?
Well, knowledge is power. The more knowledge you have about ADHD, the better. Like chad.org, you go to the website, there's all kind of information. And Chad gets funding from the Center for Disease Control to operate the ADHD Resource Center. It is the national center for ADHD. So if you call National Resource Center, you'd get a health information specialist, ask them any questions. If they don't know the answer, they'll get it researched and they'll come back to you with it. So you get information. There's a lot of books out there these days, a lot of stuff online. So you need to know, because parents will often say, well, I don't want the school to know because I don't want my child labeled. Well, they already have a label at school. He's the difficult child. This is what they say in the lunchroom or in the teacher room. He's so smart, but he just doesn't do his work. They got a label. I want them to have a correct label.
Exactly.
That makes sense, and that they understand it's not the child, it's the ADD that's doing this.
Right.
And so I would tend to say that most parents, if you have a wild child ADHD, your friends know it already.
Yeah.
And
We're always the last to know.
yeah, that's true. And it can feel bad. I mean, it feels a stigma.
Right.
And they think it's my parenting, and I'm a great parent, and he's just not. He's not. The usual parenting techniques are not working here.
Yeah.
So I like to think that you say something. Now family. So I have ADHD. Now, I was not a wild child, but I remember getting into trouble all the time for not getting homework done and playing with pens, and they'd fly across the room, and going to the principal's office. But when I talked to my mom about this a while back, she was like, "What? You're a doctor? How can you take ADHD?" I said, "Well, what are my report cards?" Well, she said, "All." And what do they say? Oh, he would do so much better if he would get his work done. His handwriting's awful. And, he's not paying attention sometimes, but he knows the stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I say this is what it is. Now, back when I was younger, unless you were a wild child, because I grew up in Norfolk, I occasionally see a kid of one of my contemporaries that I was in high school with or middle school. And it's like, oh, I know exactly what's wrong with your kid because I remember you in high school. So, and I think even to your, my mom, or, that once they understand that there's so much more known.
Right.
That you explain it.
So, I asked about friends, family, and whatnot. What about explaining to your child their diagnosis?
Well, so I'm a big one for the kid understanding what's going on, because the truth is they're the ones who are living it. And I think it's I don't want to falsely praise a child. I don't want to say, oh, you can do it.
Yeah.
Say, oh, you're working hard. Well, that's good. And I want them to know, sometimes they're going to blow it, trouble paying attention, or sometimes as a therapist I have to get to know the kid and before they can start receiving messages. Because I'll say to a kid, if I was your age, I'd want to be your friend because you're a nice kid.
Right.
Well, other kids don't like me. And then we start talking, well, what happened? Right. Well, they say I yell too much. Oh, have you ever tried not yelling? Have you ever caught, you say, how do you catch yourself?
Right.
So, and how do you watch other people to get cues?
Right.
So I think you give the kids power when they know what the problem is. And if you start when they're younger, as they get older, of course, the message may change. Like in high school, that you want them to advocate for themselves. You want them to say to the teacher, I need more time on this, or I need your help to help me organize. I have trouble with that. So I think you make it a part of them, and not as a negative, but just, unfortunately, I used to say to kids, now that we know what's going on, medication can help, and things will be so much easier. I've stopped saying that because it still takes work. That's the problem with ADHD. It takes more work.
Right.
Even a kid doing homework, to get all the homework done is going to take a lot longer than it would somebody else.
Right.
And then that's why I don't advocate extra time anymore. I advocate for modifying assignments.
That makes sense. So how long would the child need to be on medication, or I know you mentioned that they're not going to outgrow ADHD or the symptoms. They're basically just going to learn to manage it, right?
Well, yes and no. So I think the issue is the child learning as they get older what the medication does for them and what it doesn't do for them, how it's helpful and how it's not. Depending on the kid. I saw a kid one time, teenager. Well, I've been talking about my own younger daughter who has ADHD. In the first year of her license, she got lost once, coming back from, we live in Virginia Beach now, coming back from Norfolk. Somehow she ended up, who knows where, and she called and had to figure out she was like miles away. And we got a GPS after that. In the first year, she had 3 accidents. 2 of them minor, 1 could have been major. Luckily, it wasn't. Unfortunately, learning by experience is not great.
Right, right, right.
But she's a much better driver now, honestly. But so you have to decide certain times that this is important to you. If they understand how the medication works and doesn't work, maybe they go to college, they're all excited, everything's great. But then if they start seeing that they're still studying and everybody else is out having a good time, think about maybe medication would be helpful. Or you go out and get a job that you enjoy, maybe you don't need the medication. But if you're there for a while, you're going to get promoted, and now maybe you have to manage people. You get more paperwork to do, and now it's flooding you. Okay, that's okay. You can do trial medication, see it's helpful, and that's why I get a lot of referrals from adults, because they get to a point in their career or their job that it's not working the way it used to. And that does happen.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so my last question for you is, where can I find support or more resources to help with the ADHD diagnosis?
So if you put ADHD into your browser, you will get a lot of stuff. As for anything, you really need to go to reputable sites. So chadd.org, chadd.org. There's also understood.org, which is good. You can go to the CDC has a website on ADHD, and those are the main ones. You'll find other information, but you have to really understand the ADHD before you kind of. Another one actually is samgoldstein.com, SAMGOLDSTEIN.com. He's out in Utah. He is a wonderful resource, and he has all his lectures. He travels around the country. He's wonderful to listen to. He really is easy. But you can get his lectures online. There's a website called, I should have written this stuff down. I'll think about it in a second. There's, when you talk about support, now chadd.org has local chapters around the country, and we have a Hampton Roads chapter of Chadd, and they're listed under meetup.com. Meetup, yes. Yeah. If you put in Hampton Roads ADD, Hampton Roads Chadd, you'll get them. There's a woman who does a fantastic YouTube channel, and it's How to ADHD, HOWTO ADHD. Okay. And she is funny. She is really good, and she's really good. Okay. And if you look up ADHD coaching, you find a lot of sites too. Okay, so,
that's awesome. Good for adults and children. Sounds like across the gamut. Although that is awesome. So, what is if someone wants to reach out to you specifically, or where can they find you?
Yes. So, if you want to give me a call, the number is 757-463-4232, 463-4232. Okay. You'll end up leaving a message, but just put down you heard me here. Okay. Also, my website is drjeffreykatz.com. It's drjeffreykatz.com. Or lastly, my email is drjeffreykatz@gmail.com. drjeffreykatz@gmail.com. So any of those. And I'd be happy to answer, questions. I do try to give people information and resources. Like I said, like the resource guide for ADHD would be a good one. If your kids are in school, you should know these things. So that's what I would try.
That's awesome. You gave us some things to work with. I'm very excited, actually. I try to do a lot of research myself, so I'm excited to go and check some of those things out, especially the YouTube channel. So I appreciate you and your time today, and I do appreciate everyone who was able to join us and to gather this information. Was there anything else that you would like to share before we go?
I love meeting with kids who are ADHD.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I can tell that you enjoy it and that you feel fulfilled doing the work you're doing.
And I think kids with ADHD need understanding. Like I said before, kids want to do well. And if that's not happening, it's not about your parenting. It may not be about your parenting, but I mean, it's like, how do you know if the medication's still working? Well, if they're starting to have trouble in school again, you have to think about it. Now, maybe there's a learning issue you missed, or so you have to think about this. And actually, being a therapist who does this a lot, that's what I can help parents do and track. And I tell parents, you want to have somebody good in your back pocket. So I may see somebody for a few months, and maybe in 2 years when they're hitting middle school, things have shifted, and people come back in for a little while, and okay, then they're gone again. That's fine. It's you need to know your resources. Who can you call? Maybe it's a therapist. Maybe it's getting back involved with the chat local group or something like that. So
okay. Well, perfect. Thank you so much. And again, I appreciate your time. And if you are out there listening and you are looking for any type of resources specifically for Medicaid waiver service facilitation, you can definitely check out our website at www.momsinmotion.net. And that's all I have for you today. Until next time, please be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.